دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and welcome to Finding Me on the ITV networks. Today a very political discussion with a real politician. And I have with me Adil Nchabeleng, who is from the African People's Convention, the APC. And we're going to talk a little bit about the politics of the party, but more importantly, the big question which I will ask Adil right at the end is, why should we vote APC? With that, I'd like to say assalamu alaikum and thank you, Adil, for giving me this opportunity.
Wa alaikum salam and thank you so much.
You know, the one thing that struck me most when I spoke to you and I got the interview agreed upon from you was that this person is not arrogant. Generally, political parties and politicians, when they come into the limelight, you get a sense of arrogance. There's a difficulty in communicating with them, but I find an absolute humility about you. So that was a breath of fresh air, and that's why I thought, let me interview this politician. And I'm going to ask you a tough question.
Yeah.
South Africa, 25 years down the line, post-1994. The levels of poverty have increased. The Gini coefficient has shown that we are one of the most unequal countries in the world. More than 50.5% of South Africans live below the poverty line. They earn less than 992 rands a month. We have a black government in place. For the people that are ruling us, do Black Lives Matter?
For the last 25 years, it has been an experiment. And that experiment has unfortunately worked out to be the most disastrous experiment of any socio-economic society, particularly given the fact that there was a hope. Yes. There was a dream which we were promised with the Rainbow Nation. There was the hope that when we departed and out of apartheid, we moved out of that state and system of oppression. We're going to move into now the promised view of saying South Africa will be transformed. There will be an economy that works for everybody. There will be houses, there will be proper streets, there will be a thriving society. And we haven't actually departed from the apartheid nightmare. The 25 years later, we are reliving an apartheid nightmare, but this time, unfortunately, under a black rule, a black government, and the ruling party, which is black. Even though it says that it's a multicultural, multiracial, or a non-racial political party, but it is still black in its own definition. That said, gives us the whole situation to say, people like ourselves, I come from the ANC, from a ruling party itself, but when I started seeing the diversion of values and moving away from what our people's aspirations are, I realized that we might come from a similar home, which is our home, the ANC, but we have divergent ideas. They are pursuing capitalism, a much more, glitzy lifestyle politically. Some of us are not interested in that. We are interested in aspects that defines us as a society. We are interested in how our humanity is defined. And that is why when we looked and wanted to find a partner from a socio-economic political point of view to actually pursue what we have been doing as a movement, Transform RSA was already existent, had not taken a political stand or position. We then looked for a political party that has a core ideology. That core ideology being centered in the essence of who are we, what are we defined around, and that definition, how does it work for us politically so that we can pursue our socio-economic objectives. That is why we came to the home of APC. And we then entered into the space and said, gentlemen, let's make an agreement whereby we are an alliance of forces, movement that brings in the highly radicalized lobby and advocacy space that we have done throughout the whole of South Africa. Everybody knows what Transform RSA has done in terms of protecting the energy sector of South Africa and all other issues of protecting the SOEs in terms of their integrity to continue serving the socio-economic objectives of making sure that South Africa still becomes a performing society, a performing country. Then that alliance gave us what we have today, whereby you have APC as a massively now rising, political movement that espouses in it the African People's Convention, which is what APC means. And in that, we talk about advancing what is the African agenda.
So basically what you have here is the merging of a political party and a social movement.
Yeah.
And the social movement, if you speak of Transform RSA, it means that you have done extensive grassroots mobilization, grassroots work. You've protected labor rights, worker rights, etc. But there are many, many questions about the ability of individuals at grassroots levels to transform, and or a question mark per se, that if you come in from social movements, if you come in from labor unions, if you come in from a liberation movement, you do not have the skills to govern. And the greatest criticism, of course, of liberation movements in Africa has been that liberation movements just have not prepared themselves for governing. Do you feel that the APC has the potential, the capacity, the capability, the skills and the know-how to really get into governing?
Most definitely so. Remember, government, there is nowhere in the world where you have a prepared leadership that comes with all the requisite governing skills. Actually, the word governing is a misnomer because we talk about people coming together to give a direction for a particular agenda. Here, in this case, we're talking about the national agenda. People that we have within Transform RSA, people that we have within APC, the African People's Convention, are people with skills already. The president, our president, who is the president of APC, is President Themba Godi. Themba Godi has been in parliament from the previous history of being in PAC, Pan-Africanist Congress, moving out of the PAC, forming the African People's Convention, APC. And with that, for the last 14 years, he has been the chair of SCOPA, by the way, before even the formation of APC. So understanding the SCOPA space within Parliament as being the chair for 14 years, he actually studied, understood how public finance, what SCOPA stands for is actually a committee that looks at public accounts. On everything that government does, what it spends, how it spends it, and he's been the most accurately responsible in terms of corruption-free, has never had any undue influence on anything that he has done within the ambit of being the chair of SCOPA in Parliament for 14 years. He's got one of the most outstanding, actually, caliber and credibility of performance. So based on that, when we say ready to govern, we have been governing already. We have been in government already. We have already a presence. Even though right now we have one member of parliament, that one member of parliament has actually raised the standards of parliament, has raised the credibility of parliamentarians to be held accountable, for ministers, for departments to be actually responsible in how they are spending. The work that was done by SCOPA was a direct reflection of what APC, if given the opportunity and the full power to govern South Africa, what we can deliver within 5 years.
So
you don't need a long period.
Yeah, that's about ethical leadership, right?
Total ethical, corruption-free, people who are not aspiring for wealth as the ultimate objective in power. They are aspiring for service. They are aspiring for a higher cause, which is what that higher cause? To serve their fellow humanity. Remember, leadership is not about being in a position to have the luxury, sort of paraphernalias, the luxury surroundings of having bodyguards, people always attending on you. Leadership is about the one who knows the most best is able to enable the one who are on the lesser level to come up in society. And the current trajectory does not even qualify because they don't even know the difference of what leadership is about.
And I'm glad that you say that. It brings me to a quote that I remember reading. I think it is Gandhi who said that the measure for society will depend on how they treat the most vulnerable in their society. And so when we come back from the break, I just want to raise those two questions to you. In terms of the most vulnerable in society, APC, do you have policies about the environment, about animals? And most specifically, do you have policies about the elderly and about the youth? And finally, the very important thing before we go out into the break, when you said about the problem about leadership, quickly your comment, because there's been two instances now where I've seen Ramaphosa has entered into spaces of protest and he said, I didn't know that you guys didn't have water. Oh, I didn't know that you didn't have this. And the
Which
comments.
Planet is it in living?
Exactly. Black Twitter went crazy to say, like, somebody please, make a list and help this man. How can he not know? Is it possible?
Growing out of poverty
Yes.
himself.
How can he not know?
It doesn't make sense for a president to come and deny publicly that I didn't know people lived in rat-infested streets, let alone the roads, the houses. If the streets are rat-infested, what happens to the houses? Alexander is right in the middle of the biggest city in Africa.
Probably the richest city.
The richest city in Africa. Yet a street from Santin starts the most horribly managed township, 109 years in existence. And they don't know. And yet he stayed in Alexander. That raises a question.
Yes, it certainly does. But we'll see you after the break when I take on my very special guest from the APC, and it's Adil Nchabeleng.
بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, and welcome to the second segment of Finding Me today in the ITV networks. A very political discussion with a real life politician. Adil Nchabeleng is from the African People's Convention, and we're talking about the ideology and the mandate, the manifesto of the party. The big question then at the end will be, why should we vote APC? So Adil, we spoke about the question of do Black Lives Matter, and of course we find that in South Africa there's what I consider the citizen and the subject. The citizen is still very much the elite, the privileged, those who have access to resources, who have access to rights, to all of the things that is considered the good life in terms of politics. And then the vast majority of society are the subjects. They are, treated very harshly by the law, managed by the law, the arms of the state, repressed almost at certain times. For example, is what we saw in Fees Must Fall, the youth activism, what we see in all the protests, social protests, and protests outside the townships, the squatter camps, the shack dwellers. There isn't that sense that what they're asking is appreciated, nor the sense that the state or the government actually listens. And there's a very good comment recently, just yesterday or the day before, by Stephen Friedman, and he said the way in which protest is managed or reported in South Africa actually denigrates the poor. So if you look at his comment, and he says that we carry on with this argument that, the ANC arranged the protest in Tshwane, in Johannesburg and in Cape Town because these are DA-controlled areas and they wanted to make trouble before the elections. And he said that denigrates the poor. It's as if to say that the poor do not have a voice, that they are very happy with living in this squalor, and that somebody has to organize them to come and make a noise just before the elections. But we forget that protests have been the landscape of South African environment for more than 40 years, from the 1970s, which started, of course, at the dock workers. So considering all of these facts, what is the main ideology behind the APC? I see that you have a mixture of black consciousness, and you have some SACP, and you have some of the PAC, but what drives the APC?
The APC is actually themed ideologically around the Pan-Africanist ideology. From a Pan-Africanist point of view, as you know, historically and from antiquity, time immemorial, Africa has always been a socialist society. We care and we share and we live together with one another.
That's what I always understood.
That's what it's about.
Yeah.
The whole element of capitalism is something that was then introduced when trading advanced in an African society, where people would barter and they would accumulate property. But it didn't alienate us from still being a caring and sharing society from a social responsibility point of view. And that is why we are not about wealth for one person in exclusion of the majority. We're saying wealth should represent and reflect the system and the society and the level of equality, not inequality in a society. So as APC, we are very clear ideologically. Pan-Africanism has always been the leading philosophy, civilization throughout ages. From time immemorial, the birth of mankind brought about that. Pan-Africanism is that definition. When we say we are for an African agenda, is the rebirth of what we lost throughout colonialization, throughout the imperial forces coming in and actually unsettling us and colonizing us, and only pursuing a pan-European agenda, which is to take our mineral resources, to take our human resources and exploit the whole of Africa, particularly South Africa in this case. Taking away the wealth, leaving away the rot that has currently manifested in itself in the current social tensions that you find, the revolts happening, the aspect of people being dissatisfied, where you have, as Professor Friedman says very nicely, that it denigrates the poor. in terms of the social inequality as well as the aspect of the revolts within communities. It's true. People are organized for a particular objective because it's opportunistic. But the fact that our poor are so downtrodden that they do not even have means by which they can have a voice unless they have to beg for a grant, it shows you the level of rot. And that is an unacceptable situation whereby if the ruling party thinks that for the next 20 years to come, for the next 5 years to come, its only goal and aim is to literally, dehumanize and humiliate poor people much more further by saying every time you vote for us, we will guarantee you a grant and a rundown house in some squatter or whatever they call it, where they don't even live in. That's a political party that should be thrown out of power. People should by now in South Africa standing up and actually ejecting the current leadership, the ANC, the current opposition parties who are useless for the last 25 years, have not delivered anything except to stop progress happening in the country. Remember, the element of political parties is to ensure that policies are delivered so that we can deliver for the people. But most of our opposition parties have been against the delivery of policies that will enable the development of our society. So why do we need parties in South Africa that are against the people's will and interest?
So do you think then, of all this that you have just said, do you find that the political parties, the leading ANC majority-led government at the moment, and of course the DA, do you find or do you think that there is a gap in the understanding of the way in which the demographics and the dynamics of South Africa is changing, because the youth are stepping up? They're stepping up to the platform and they are the ones who are raising the protest. And all of these protests, Alex, if you go out, Northwest, Klerksdorp, Free State, when you go to there and you sit and examine the situation, it's the youth, it's young people, it's students, school children who are leading the protests. And so the youth definitely have a voice, and they do not have the kind of loyalty that the older people have to the ANC. Is the ANC going to start eroding its membership or even its loyalties?
The loyalty to the ANC is already eroded. People are just holding on to a faded dream of saying hopefully they might change.
So Ramaphosa
So
at
the
the moment.
abuse has already happened. So the Ramaphosa euphoria is a false one, because Ramaphosa comes from the same mechanism that made up what is currently reflected as the rot. And he is the pinnacle of it. It's like putting in a cake mix which carries all the ingredients. You put water, the whole thing then will be crystallized and will become the cake. Whether it's going to taste nice or not, we don't know. But in his case, one, we know he has made a lot of money. He's a billionaire. Where did he make that money? When he has never worked a single day in his life to build a single company except to acquire shares. How has he been responsible in how he has been distributing his wealth? He has not looked after the poor. He's been interested in just making sure that he can buy buffaloes at 54 million at a time. And he owns one of the buffaloes, a share in a buffalo, which is about 260 million. So how do you have that kind of a personality who is so far removed, who when he drives into Alex as the president of the country can even make a mistake of saying, I am actually shocked, I didn't know how people live, which means he is so far removed from the society that he's supposed to be leading. He doesn't even understand the conditions of the people on a day-to-day basis. So the protests are going to continue. We have one of the highest records of protests in South Africa, over 5,600 protests happening at any given time in a year. Plus, given the short period of leading to the election, it's even worse. So the real situation is not even being expressed. People are not reaching the level where they will bend down things, but because South African spirit is still tolerant. But the tolerance is being too stretched, because we cannot continue to be seeing. We counted cars that drove into Alex when the presidential motorcade went in. It was over 30 cars behind. All of them were all state funded. All of them are high luxury sedans. None of them show the level of humility. None of them have an understanding of how it is to live among the people.
Address the people.
Very few of them came out of that environment, except the organizers who were given 100 rand or 1,000 rand to put up the event. So what does that tell you about the situation where we are in South Africa, whereby the ultra-rich, those who have made money through dubious, corrupt means, and they've never worked.
Capitalist
They
process.
don't own factories, they don't own production capital, they don't own businesses that make money. They only have shares, and they only better favors in respect to actually giving the so-called delivery of being in power. what kind of a society are we going to grow where the leaders are the most irresponsible?
But I'm glad that you're making this kind of critique, because when I was discussing with my students, and one student was going on about the West, and I said, no, hang on, everything about the West is not bad, because there are things that we can rightfully take from Scandinavian countries with their social democratic policies, etc. If you look at their civil servants, they have the highest ethical standards. The minute they are blamed for something, they will resign or they will show remorse. You know, there is measures in place for accountability. We've chosen to go with the material aspect, chasing, you know, wealth and populism, chasing status and of course ego.
Even worse.
But not taking what is very good, which you can find in other states.
In developed societies,
yeah, in Norway, how they protect their oil. Why aren't South Africans, why hasn't our regime chosen to follow those ethical values? But we're coming to the end of this particular interview. We're going to come back with the second one. I would like to just you to give your parting comment, and I want to close this concept of leadership. So your parting comment about leadership.
If a leader is asked, there was a union building march whereby actually Cyril Ramaphosa as the president attended to that march. He was asked to say, please release the student, the fees must fall student who are jailed unnecessarily, who are put into prison. And his heart didn't move a cent to say that these people didn't commit a crime out of the fact that they were just being criminals. They were actually given a sentence to a crime for standing for human rights justice. What type of a leader do we have in that society? So we have to ask the caliber of a leadership. If your heart does not move for the people that stood for human rights justice, that stood for civil rights, that stood for society's rights, education is a right. How it was delivered, the processes can be accounted for. If there was a mistake, those young people should be pardoned and not put in prison unnecessarily for standing for fees must fall. They should have been released by today, and there should have been a proper presidential pardon given, and the president failed completely to do that. What type of a society? Why should we elect a man like him?
But that is a very, very powerful closing, and something very close to my heart, because I have seen many of the students, I know some of them who are in jail, who are still, you know, enduring the pain of suspended sentences. There is a young man who's completed his degree. He cannot apply for a teaching post because he still has a backlog of a debt to pay, and the university is blacklisting him from getting the funds because he was a student activist.
That is what we're saying.
In the
Vote APC.
Yeah.
Once you give us the power, we will fight for the rights of our people. We will go in there and make sure that those students who are arrested today for protesting for free education are released. This is the promises that we must make to our people, that education is a right and education is about freedom. And fees must fall was a legitimate civil society-based advancement, and the students deserve to be treated properly.
Thank you very much, Adil. We're going to raise further questions with you in the next interview, but I'll see you next week. Fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء.
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا في